The Haloa was a fascinating midwinter Greek festival which took place around the end of what we would call December. It was performed in honour of Demeter, a goddess, and also associated with Poseidon and Dionysus. It was an all-women affair with a priestess in charge. After an initial sacrifice, the fun began. This was a panikis, a type of feast that went on all night. And it wasn't just like any feast which went on all night. The idea was that the women would behave badly. They'd discuss adultery, were encouraged to swear, and also ate genital-shaped pastries. There's a lot to unwrap here, so in subsequent videos I'm going to pick up some of these important elements. Just to give you an idea though, the vase image you can see behind me is apparently depicting what went on at the festival. It's two women dancing around something. Yes. And that thing is exactly what you think it is. The main event at the Haloa was the feast, but where did it take place exactly? Well, probably here, at the Telesterion. Just to recap, this is from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and the Telesterion, just as a reminder, was at the sanctuary of Demeter at Eleusis. The original dated as far back as the Archaic period, but bits were added over time. But the basics were that it was a hall measuring some 52 by 54 metres, and that apparently could accommodate up to 3,000 people. But it wasn't an open plan space. It was colonnaded, meaning there were all sort of columns in the way. And that really must have disrupted the eye line and created quite a weird visual experience when you're in there. There were actually 42 columns. As I mentioned in the previous video, the start of all of this would have been a sacrifice, and it's possible that this would have been mid-afternoon. That would have allowed for people to arrive at the sanctuary and for the feast to be set up in the hall, which, by the way, had seating as well. Now, the sacrifice was possibly bloodless. This means that there wasn't an animal used. It would have been an offering of perhaps some sort of harvest, grain, or, wait for it, a cake. I know, disgraceful. Anyway, once this had happened, everyone would have moved inside, and then the women would begin the real festivities and the bad behaviour. And I'm going to go on about the bad behaviour in the next video. So if you like that kind of thing, and I'm sure you do, then just click follow. During the feast and after it, women from all levels of society, and I say that because there's evidence that prostitutes were there as well, were encouraged to tell saucy tales, talk about adultery, and generally let loose. But why was this encouraged so much? What was the rationale behind it? Perhaps it was a social valve, but it was more likely part of the religious worship of Demeter. There's a myth involving Demeter where the goddess assumes human form after the abduction of her daughter Persephone and arrives at Eleusis in a state of grief. She's spotted and brought into a nearby palace where the women there try and cheer her up, and they try a number of things. In one version, it's jokes which gets the goddess to smile again, but in another, it's an elderly maid flashing her. Now, the Greeks had a word, apereta, and this could mean obscene, but also had worth in the religious context. And academics have argued that's what's happening here. In the depth of winter, women were cheering up or stimulating an agricultural deity, Demeter, and making sure that she would reward them with a good harvest, or at least bountiful and fertile fields. And just as an aside, this is actually where Poseidon is involved in all of this. I mentioned him in the first video I did on this. He was a kind of side act to it all. But his role was largely about ensuring correct and good irrigation of the fields. Either way, it must have been one hell of a night.